What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to another Elden Ring video. Now for today's video, I'm doing yet another tier list. I figured why not? My tier list videos seem to be just blowing up for whatever reason, and I really enjoy making them, so here we are doing another tier list video. So this one's a bit different. In this video, I'm going to be ranking what, in my opinion, is the best boss designs in all of Elden Ring. Now before we get started, I'm only ranking the 15 major bosses in this game. Basically, any boss that has a remembrance, I'm putting on this list because those are some of the hardest bosses and they're some of the most important in regards to the story and the lore. And I know some people are going to say, well, why didn't you include blah, blah, blah? Well, this game has like 80 some bosses and it's literally impossible for me to rank every single one of them. Trust me, I would if I could, but these videos take me like days to record and edit, so I'm only ranking the 15 major bosses here. Now some of the different ways that I'm going to be ranking them is based off of their looks, like how cool does the boss look, how cool is the environment that the fight takes place in, how fun is the boss to fight. There's a number of different factors that's going into how I'm ranking these boss fights. Oh, and by the way, spoiler warning, if you guys haven't beaten the game for whatever reason, or if you don't want to know what some of the bosses are, then turn back now because I'm going to be talking about some major spoilers for Elden Ring here. So getting into the first boss on this list, we have the Fire Giant. Now I have some mixed feelings about the Fire Giant. I'm not a big fan of the environment with the Fire Giant. Everything's just in the snowy area and it's not really a set boss area. It's just kind of outside. The environment isn't really that good to look at. I mean, there's the giant fire forge off in the distance. That's kind of cool, I guess. But as for the giant himself, I really like the design of the giant. I was getting some major God of War vibes when I was playing this boss fight. I like that there's different phases to him. Once you get him down low enough on health, he'll get really angry and this giant face will open up in his chest. And it'll just shoot lava out of his giant mouth in his chest, and it just looks so cool. And I really like the fact that they have this detail where he has this like brace on his leg, and if you attack his leg, it will like knock off the brace and it'll hold his leg in anger. And then during the cutscene, he'll rip his leg off. There's just pieces of this fire giant that are just rotting away, which is just really cool. As for the fight itself though, I was really struggling with him my first playthrough because I couldn't get Torrent to summon for whatever reason. I had to fight him on foot, and boy was that a major pain. Fighting him on foot was awful because he has such crazy range with his shield attack. He can just slam it down on you and pretty much insta-kill you if you don't have enough health. His roll attack is really hard to dodge because he's so big. But on my second playthrough, I was able to get on Torrent and I was able to just poke and prod at him and sort of hit and run, and it was way easier on my second playthrough. But for the fight itself, I thought it was okay. Nothing really groundbreaking there. It was just a cool boss fight. But for the Fire Giant, I think I'm going to put the Fire Giant at B tier. I don't think he's worthy of like S or A, but I don't think he's so bad that he's D or C. I think he's just kind of in the middle. But yeah, I think B tier is a pretty good spot for him. So up next is Godric the Grafted. Now this is technically the second major boss that you're going to encounter in Elden Ring. Now as for Godric himself, I don't think he's that cool. He's just this big, goofy looking dude with a bunch of body parts slapped all over him. He's pretty ugly, and the environment isn't really that cool either. It's just this castle courtyard with a bunch of destruction all around you. And you know, as for the environment, I didn't think it was that cool. It wasn't until his second phase of the boss fight is when things really started to pick up. He cuts off his own arm and then takes the head of a dead dragon, and then that becomes his new arm, and then he uses a dead dragon head in the boss fight. That's where I was sort of blown away. This is the first boss encounter that you have where there's two phases in Elden Ring, so that in itself was kind of mind-blowing because I wasn't expecting him to go into a second phase where he got harder and he had a completely different moveset. But I thought that was just so unbelievably cool that he just had a dragon head as an arm. That was just so unique and just such a cool design. For the boss fight itself, it wasn't too bad. I think I struggled more with Margot than I did with Godric. You know, Godric outside of his dragon arm, I don't think is that impressive. Honestly, if it wasn't for the dragon part, he would probably be D tier. That's kind of all he has going for him for me is his dragon arm. So I'm going to put Godric at C tier because he only really has going for him is the dragon part. Outside of his dragon part, I didn't really think he was that cool of a boss fight. So up next is the Regal Ancestor Spirit. Now this ancestor spirit is just a giant zombie deer thing. It doesn't have a cutscene, you just sort of like light some torches and you go in and fight it. Now there's actually 2 of these different deer bosses that you can fight, and they're pretty much identical. They might have 1 or 2 movesets that are different from one another, but when it comes to this boss fight, I think that this is a pretty forgettable boss, because this is probably one of the easiest bosses in this entire list. Their moves are pretty easily predictable. I struggled just a couple times in my first playthrough, but once I learned the movement pattern, I beat this thing pretty much with ease. I don't know what it is with video games and having deer be this sort of like majestic, sort of like spirit of the woods kind of deal. So a magical deer is something I've seen before, like time and time again. So I don't think there's anything too special about this. I don't hate this boss fight, but in comparison to everything else on this list, I'm going to have to put it at D tier, just because, you know, it's got nothing on everything else in this list. So up next is Star Scourge Radon. Now this is a boss fight. I remember watching that opening cutscene, I was just like, oh my god, this dude's a monster. How am I ever going to kill this guy? And as soon as you enter the boss arena, he's immediately just charging up his giant bow, and he's going to pretty much just shoot you in the face. I think he insta-killed me as soon as I entered the arena on my first playthrough, and I struggled so much in my first playthrough with this guy. It took me hours and hours and hours to finally kill him, because I had no clue how to do it. He's just so unbelievably aggressive. He has multiple phases. Once you get him low enough on health, he'll fly up into the air, then come back down and slam down onto the ground. He's riding around on this really tiny horse that doesn't match his body at all. I don't really understand how his horse is carrying him, but hey, props to the horse, I guess. The environment here is so cool though. It's just this big, barren wasteland. There's tons of just death and destruction and all these old corpses and all these old like swords and bows and spears and stuff just lying all around the battlefield from everybody that's fought him and failed. And I think this boss fight was just awesome. This is definitely one of the most memorable boss fights in all of Elden Ring. I think when most people talk about Elden Ring and they talk about the bosses, this is probably one of the first ones that come to mind. And because he just had such a cool arena and his design was so good, like, I'm going to put him up at S tier. I think that was a really good boss fight, and that's something that's definitely going to stick with me, and I'm always going to remember fighting him. So up next is Reichard, the Lord of Blasphemy. Now I'm going to just straight up say it that I love the design of this boss fight. It's just a giant serpent god. It's just a huge snake in this underground gigantic chamber in the lava castle. And there's just tons of different cages hanging from the ceilings and giant pillars, and there's lava all over the place. The atmosphere in this boss fight was awesome. I loved the look of this boss fight. It was so cool. And this boss fight, like the fight itself, could either be really easy or really difficult, because they give you the serpent sword at the beginning, and if you use that, the first phase isn't that bad. But if you for some reason don't pick up that sword, or pick it up and don't decide to use it, then you're going to struggle a lot. Like, I feel bad for anyone that tried to fight this guy without using the serpent sword, because he's just got tons of AoE fire all around him and lava just all around the base of him. So if you get up close to him, you can't hit him because you're just going to take all this fire damage. So for me, I didn't struggle too much with him on my first playthrough, but for some reason on my second playthrough, he was much harder, and he really gave me a struggle on my second playthrough. But overall, I think the boss fight's fun when you use that giant serpent sword. It's really fun to just use this giant magical sword. This is like the only boss encounter in the game that gives you a weapon specifically to fight that boss. Every other boss fight, you just have to use the weapons that you have on you. So I thought that part was cool. And then he goes into the second phase and he has this cutscene where he like reveals that he has a face underneath the serpent, and he pulls out this giant sword, and oh man, it's so freaking cool. I love everything about this boss fight. The only thing I don't like about the boss fight is where every time he would kill you, he would say a stupid catchphrase talking about how you and him are going to devour the gods together, and he would say it over and over and over. That's the only complaint I have with the boss fight. I thought it was awesome, and it's an easy S tier for me. It's one of my favorite boss fights in the entire game. So up next is Rinala, the Queen of the Full Moon. Now this is probably the third major boss that most people encounter in Elden Ring. It's up in the academy. Basically, basically the big Hogwarts castle, and this boss fight takes place in the library. Now in my first playthrough, I was super confused because when I was in this boss fight, there was no guides on how to beat it at the time, so I had to figure everything out on my own. So I was just running around, killing all of her little minions on the floor, and I couldn't figure out how to get her shield to drop. It wasn't until like hours and hours later that it finally dawned on me that I had to kill the specific girl that had the like little gold magic spell going on to like knock her shields down. And once you discover the mechanics of the boss fight, it becomes immediately just super easy. It isn't until the second phase where things really start to pick up, and depending on how long the second phase lasts, she can summon like tons of different spirits. She can summon dragons and hit you with giant moon spells, and things get really crazy in the second phase. But overall, when it comes to the boss fight, I thought it was a cool mechanic in the library in the first phase, but it wasn't really so much fighting the boss in the first phase. You're kind of just knocking her down and smacking her over and over and wash, rinse, repeating that until you get to the second phase. But for the most part, I don't like her as much as some of these other boss fights. I think she's kind of forgettable. I'm just going to put her at C tier because there was aspects of the boss fight that I enjoyed. I just didn't think it was like one of the best boss fights ever. So next up is Margot, the Omen King. Now I didn't include Margot because Margot and Margot are pretty much the same person. And when it comes to the Omen King fight, you're just on top of everything in the capital, and you're basically just up where the throne is. And you're fighting in this big open environment at the base of the Erd tree. And for the environment itself, there's nothing really too special. It's just this big open courtyard. And I wasn't really too impressed with the environment. And when it comes to the boss fight and his character design, it's just this big dude wearing this like really raggy looking robes, and his sword's cool. Like I really love the design of his sword, but when you're fighting him, he's super aggressive and can deal a lot of damage. I really like the lore behind him, but when it comes to like his overall design and his boss fight, I wasn't the biggest fan. It just really isn't that cool to look at to me. So honestly, I'm gonna put him at C tier as well, because honestly, outside of just how strong he is, I think he's kind of just a forgettable boss fight. So up next, we have his brother, Moog, the Lord of Blood. Now, Moog, in my opinion, is way cooler than his brother. I think Moog's atmosphere is just dark and gloomy, and everything around you is just covered in this darkness and blood, and it just looks super evil. And the atmosphere in this boss fight I really enjoyed, because everything around you just seems like doom and gloom, and it basically feels like you're in hell when you're fighting this guy. Now, Moog himself, he's kind of basic. He's basically like his brother. He's just a big dude that's wearing this like priest outfit. It isn't until you get him into his second phase where he like sprouts out wings, that's when it gets really cool. All his movesets are just blood based, so there's blood just everywhere. He's throwing blood at you. Blood's raining down from the sky on top of you, doing bleed damage to you. It was a really tough boss fight. So I really like the atmosphere. I really like the design of his second phase, and I really love just the whole aesthetic of the boss fight. So I'm going to put him ahead of his brother, and I'm actually going to put him up at A tier. So up next is the Lich Dragon Fortisax. Now, I'm a bit of a sucker when it comes to dragons. The Lich Dragon Fortisax is a dragon that you actually fight in a dream, so that's pretty neat. The atmosphere itself, I think, is also pretty cool because everything around you is just basically covered in lightning, because this dragon is just shooting out everything. He's got lightning attacks, he's got fire attacks, he has death blight attacks, so if you stand too long in the fog, you're just going to insta-die. He's really aggressive, so he's constantly just going to be lunging at you and trying to just scratch at you. He'll fly up into the air, and he has this one move where it will one-shot kill you if he hits you with it. And this is just a really badass looking dragon. I love the design of this dragon in this boss fight. The attacks, the red lightning, the atmosphere, everything about this boss fight I thought was awesome, so I'm going to put it up at A tier. I don't like it as much as some of the others to put it up in S tier, but I think it's definitely a solid A, and it's just a really good design of a dragon. So up next is Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, which in his second phase goes by Horlu. Now obviously, if I didn't like the environment for Morgott, I'm not going to like the environment for Godfrey, because obviously they fight in the same exact place. Now Godfrey himself is kind of cool. He basically reminds me of Hercules in a way. He's just this big, strong, muscular man that basically just spam attacks you. Every time I fought him, he would just spam his foot stomp over and over and over. I like his second phase better than his first phase, where he's just like covered in blood and he's real muscular and he's just trying to just beat the crap out of you. If he catches you, he'll like jump up into the air and power bomb you into the ground, which can one-shot kill you. He's just super strong. But for the boss fight itself, I liked it a little bit better than Morgott, but not much better. So I'm going to put him at B tier. So up next is Ratagon / the Elden Beast, because in the first phase of the fight you fight Ratagon, and then the second phase of the fight you fight the Elden Beast. Now the Ratagon fight I think is just super dull and boring. You're in this big dark room, nothing's really going on in the environment, and he's just coming at you with his hammer over and over again. And I don't really like his design that much either. He's just kind of basic looking. Now his hammer I think is pretty cool, but for him and in the environment, I just wasn't a big fan of the atmosphere and the fight for Ratagon. But when you get to the Elden Beast, the environment completely changes. Everything's covered in water, the sky is all lit up, and the Elden Beast itself looks really cool. He's like a giant plesiosaurus with wings, and his skin is translucent so you can see right through him and you can see all his insides, and he just looks really cool. Now as for the boss fight itself, I wasn't a big fan of the fight because he just keeps running away over and over. Like he'll just hit you a couple times and then swim clear across the room so you can't get him. So I wasn't a big fan of that. I thought a couple of his movesets were really neat, but overall for his boss fight, I just wasn't a big fan of the way that he fought. So with all things in consideration, I wasn't a big fan of Ratagon, but I was a fan of the Elden Beast. I think that kind of averages out to about B tier, because if I enjoyed the Ratagon fight a little bit better, I would have put him up to A or maybe even S tier. But that whole first phase I just wasn't a fan of, so I think that puts the whole boss fight down to B tier. So up next is Estelle, Natural Born of the Void. Now this creature is crazy. I remember walking through the fog for the first time and seeing this creature and was just blown away because the atmosphere is nuts. You're basically like fighting in outer space inside of a cave. There's just stars all around you. It looks like there's clouds all across the ceiling and on the walls, and you can see like the galaxy in between the clouds and the stars. That's pretty cool. As for the creature design itself, this thing is nuts. It's got like a giant skull with an eyeball in the center of it and giant pincers and skeleton legs and hands and a giant weird body made up of what looks like small planets, and it's got a giant tail. It's got gravity powers. It can summon giant meteors to shoot at you. It can teleport. This thing killed me so many times with its teleport move, where it would just teleport behind me, pick me up, and insta-kill me. This is definitely a boss fight to remember. I think the design of this creature is super horrifying. This thing is easy nightmare fuel, and because this thing is so creepy and mysterious, I think it's an easy S tier on design. I love the design of this creature. I think it looks awesome, and I think it easily deserves to be S tier. So up next we have Malacath. Now Malacath technically has two forms as well. The first phase you just fight the beast clergyman, and then the second phase he transforms into Malacath. Now the first phase, you know, he can be a bit powerful, he can be pretty aggressive, but the second phase he just goes nuts. Like his second phase, the Black Blade will do damage to you over time, so if he hits you with it and you somehow survive, your health bar will just get smaller and smaller and smaller, and he's just a monster. Now I didn't struggle with this guy as much as other people did. Back when I did my ranking video on like the hardest bosses in the game, I didn't include him at all because I just didn't think he was that bad in comparison to other boss fights, but I know a lot of people have been struggling with this guy. When it comes to the design of him, I really like his armor, and the environment's okay. It's just this big giant room with a bunch of pillars and stuff in it. I think it's a good boss fight. It just doesn't stand out to me as much as some of these others. So I'm going to put him at B tier as well, because I do think he's a good, fun boss fight, and I enjoy the mechanics, and I enjoy how aggressive he is and his unique abilities. But I think B tier is a good place to put him. So getting into the final two, up next we have the Dragon Lord, Placid Sax. I'm a little biased because, like I said, I really enjoy dragons. This dragon is so cool. He has 2 heads, and it looks like at some point he had even more heads, but some of them have been cut off. The environment that you fight him in is absolutely mind-blowing, because technically you're fighting him in this different reality, kind of like frozen in time. To get to him, you have to like jump down a bunch of rocks and go through this cutscene, and everything around you just changes in the environment, and it's just this big, giant arena that this dragon's in. And the dragon himself is just this really gigantic dragon with tons of lightning attacks, and he can teleport, and he just can fly in and out of combat, and he also has a move that can one-shot kill you if he hits you with it. In my opinion, this is one of the hardest boss fights in the game. The only way I was able to kill him in my first playthrough was because he glitched out and he froze still, and he just let me just wail on him. If it wasn't for him freezing in place, I probably wouldn't have been able to kill him, because anytime you get close to doing damage to him, he'll just teleport away from you so you can't hurt him. I just love the atmosphere of this boss fight. I love the design of this dragon, and I think he's going up to S tier. Which brings us down to the final boss fight, which is Melania. Now, Melania is, in my opinion, the hardest boss fight in the game, and I feel like most people would probably agree with me in that regard, because she's just absolutely nuts. She has a pretty basic design. She's got some prosthetic limbs on her, and she's wearing some armor. You know, pretty basic. The environment itself is also pretty basic, so I can't really give them too much props for the environment, because the environment's pretty dull. There's nothing really going on in the environment. But what I really enjoy is the second phase, where she blooms and she gets these wings, and she's basically naked, but she's like covered up in certain spots, and she keeps hitting you with this move where the whole room just turns pink with her scarlet rot bloom. And I really love the mechanics of this boss fight. She's one of the hardest bosses in the game, so she's definitely probably on everyone's list for the most memorable. So I don't like her design as much as some of these others, but I do think she's really memorable, and I do really love her second phase. So I'm going to put Melania up at A tier. I don't think she's worthy of S tier, but I do think, you know, an easy A. She's way better than a lot of these other bosses. And I think her just overall design with her lore and her Scarlet Rot abilities is just really, really cool. So that is going to do it for this tier list on the best boss designs, in my opinion. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section down below. If you guys enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button if you're new here. If you guys want to see another Elden Ring tier list, I have a couple of them up on my channel already, so be sure to check those out. And that is going to do it for me, everyone, and I will talk to you all in the next video.